All right, we are moving on to 49ers against the Rams. This is the first preview for week 3 at SoFi Stadium, which is sure to feature more than 80% 49ers fans again at their home away from home. And boy, are the Rams in rough shape. That's how we have to open this up. They're 0-2, but those of you who weren't on the 49ers bandwagon yet in 2020 probably are still scarred by the injury list that was as long as a book for the 49ers by like week 4, week 5 of that year. It really got bad in week 2 for San Francisco. That's when Nick Bosa tore his ACL. That's when Jimmy Garoppolo suffered a high ankle sprain that would dog him for the whole season. Well, the Rams are in a similar position as the 49ers were back in 2020. The Rams are absolutely thrashed with injuries right now. On top of that, they lost Aaron Donald to retirement. So they don't have Aaron Donald at all anymore. That's kind of like their Nick Bosa lost, right? They lost their best defensive lineman. And then on top of that, the list is just absurdly long. These are the offensive injuries up on the screen for you. So Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Jonah Jackson, one of the new guards that they picked up this offseason to try to fortify the offensive line. That has not gone well. That's gone comically bad. I'll show you that in a second. Steve Avila, another offensive lineman. Joe Noteboom has been with the Rams for a while, and KT Leviston. All those guys unavailable coming up for this game against the 49ers. Then we move to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive backs especially are hurt for the Rams. So Darius Williams, Darion Kendrick, Trey Tomlinson, and the safety Josh Johnson, all on the shelf for the Rams entering this game. So the results so far, as you might predict, have not been good for the Rams because they've been missing all these guys. But even in week 1, before they're missing everybody on these lists, the Rams were not impressive to me. They hung in there with the Lions. I get it. It went to overtime, but they were just so depleted by overtime. They couldn't stop a single power run from Detroit. And that game went down the drain. Then last week, the Rams lost 41-10 to the Cardinals. And that's when the full extent of this list took hold. But I'm going to take off all text titles. I take off the video window just so you could look in on this. This is Ben Baldwin's 4 graphs. The one that we really need to focus on to begin is pass protection. So I'm going to zoom in on it. And I'm going to look at the cluster of teams. This is sorted on the x-axis by PFF grade in pass protection. So the further to the right, the better things are for a team. And then the y-axis is pass block win rate from ESPN. So 2 different metrics of pass protection. You want to be further to the right, further up. The Eagles and the Colts have pass blocked well. Looks like the Bills have pass blocked well. And then everybody's kind of in this mush in the middle, especially the 49ers, who are right there with the Bengals, the Lions, and the Chiefs. You're probably wondering, well, where are the Rams? How come I can't find the Rams on this graph? Let's scroll to the left. There they are. The Rams over here. The Rams PFF grade is in the 20s. I've never seen a PFF grade cumulatively for a team be that bad. Their PFF O-line blocking grade is in the 20s. They're missing a lot of guys. They try to improve the offensive line this offseason. Well, the guards they try to pick up, Kevin Dotson and Jonah Jackson, they're both hurt now. The Rams are in the 20s. The gap in PFF grade between the top-ranked team, the Colts, and the 25th ranked team, who I believe somebody like the Titans, the Seahawks are second to last. The Titans are probably, or the Jaguars. The gap between 1 and 25 is not as big as the gap as 31 to 32, Seahawks to Rams. That's how much worse the Rams pass protection has been than any other team. So our first preview of 49ers Rams, the point there is that This is a get well opportunity for San Francisco. I don't care if they don't have Christian McCaffrey. I don't care if they don't have Deebo Samuel. Those two losses are obviously very big losses for the 49ers, but they're playing an extremely shorthanded Rams team. They just got their asses handed to them by the Arizona Cardinals, and they couldn't stop the run game at all down the stretch against the Detroit Lions. So the 49ers, who, yes, they do have that gap at CMC spot. They do have that gap at Deebo Samuel's spot. He has the calf strain. He's going to be out for a couple weeks. But the structure of their team, unlike the Rams, is still in place. 49ers still have their offensive line in place. They still have their defensive line in place. And the Rams, who have, we could go back to this right here, Ben Baldwin's 4 charts. The one in the left, upper left here, is downright gruesome, and you see the Rams all the way over here, but they're not performing well anywhere. If we go to the pass rush one, the Rams are on the left side. Yeah, their win rate seems okay, but their grade isn't good, so only one metric thinks that the Rams are all right. If we go to the run blocking graph, well, here the Rams are again struggling on the left side where you don't want to be. And we go to the run defense graph. Well, it looks like the Rams are mediocre at best, but win rate has them as a bottom barrel team in run stop win rate. So the Rams are performing well exactly nowhere, and that's why they're 0-2. Matthew Stafford has already shown signs of being beaten up. I mean, speaking of Jimmy Garoppolo, he's the Rams' backup quarterback. And the issue with Jimmy Garoppolo throughout his 49ers tenure was always injuries. So the Rams need to stay healthy, and they're not. And that's why the 49ers have an opportunity entering this game. So I talk about the San Francisco. Obviously, no McCaffrey, no Deebo makes the 49ers worse. But so far, the Rams have been vulnerable to the run game. And Jordan Mason has been a fine backup when it comes to stopping the run, or when it comes to running and challenging teams in their effort to stop the run. Jordan Mason has run through contact better than all but 3 or 4 backs in the league so far, according to the metrics. He has 51 rushing yards over expectation after contact this year. So that stat means if you were to put a random average running back in Jordan Mason's place, he'd have 51 fewer yards after contact throughout only 2 games. That's a lot of yards above expectation over only 2 contests. He was running hard against the New York Jets to open the season. He was running really hard in week 2 against the Minnesota Vikings. 28 carries followed by 20 carries on a short week. Remember, they went from Monday night to Sunday against Minnesota. They're going to have a full week of rest for the Rams. I expect another heavy dose of Jordan Mason. I think he's the one that's ready for this job. Isaac Grendo had 1 carry, but it didn't seem that he was patient enough trying to find that hole on the outside zone. I mean, the king of patience as in terms of finding an outside zone crease to plant his foot and cut up field, that was Raheem Mostert. That's something that Isaac Guerrero, who's trying to channel his inner Raheem Mostert by changing numbers to number 31, is going to have to figure out. But for the time being, I don't think that Isaac Guerrero is ready. I think this is Jordan Mason's job, and the 49ers are fine with that because of how much of a workhorse he's been over the course of the first 2 weeks. So no McCaffrey, I think, impacts that pass game more adversely than the 49ers run game because he's such a good receiver. He's such a gravitational force. Deebo Samuel's been the 49ers' best passing target so far. So that's obviously going to affect the passing game, and it also affects the run game because he's been the second option behind Jordan Mason. So when you look at how the 49ers are going to have to play this game, Juwan Jennings, who's been great in his career against the Rams, is going to have to step up. George Kittle, more of a load on him. He's done great stuff against the Rams over his career. And obviously, Brandon Ayuk has to become a bigger part of San Francisco's offense. I put these graphics up yesterday. It was the yards per route run. Ayuk is only at 1.1 yard per route run. He was at 3.2 last year. So as far as his efficiency, when combined with the 49ers offense, when it's, used as when we look at yards per route run as a metric to see how somebody is performing within the context of the offense, Brandon Ayuk has been at about 33% of his pre-contract efficiency That's going to have to change in this game. And when we look at the Rams' injuries in the defensive backfield, from Williams to Kendrick to Trey Tomlinson to the safety, Josh Johnson, Josh Johnson slipped up there. John Johnson, the safety. The 49ers should have opportunities against a lot of youngsters in that Rams defensive backfield. I just don't think that LA is going to be capable of running exotic stuff the way that Minnesota was able to run to prevent the 49ers separation and also confuse Brock Purdy. I just don't think that, we don't even have to look at the coordinator matchup in this game. Let's just look at the personnel. There's no Andrew Van Ginkel and there's no Harrison Smith, Minnesota safety, both Minnesota defenders who just seem to be amorphous weapons in that game last week, who are all over the field, giving the 49ers big time trouble as San Francisco was trying to figure out if they were going to rush the passer, play the run, drop back in coverage. Matchups make fights. And I've thought about this a lot. The 49ers also have had the Rams number for a long time, but I get the Vikings have had the 49ers number for at least 2 years now. But we talk about matchups making fights. San Francisco has given LA trouble due to its positionless skill position offense. Guys like Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, even Brandon Ayuk, Kyle Juszczyk playing absolutely everywhere. Well, when you look at Minnesota, their defense was able to counter the 49ers offense in large part because they had defensive weapons who could either rush the passer or drop back into coverage or credibly play against the run. It was an amorphous defense. Dare I say a positionless skill position defense. I think that's why the 49ers have not been able to run the play action that they've wanted to run over the past 2 years against the Vikings. Their play action rate in that game on Sunday that they lost was 7.3%. Their play action rate against Minnesota last year was 9%. The 49ers ran play action against the against anybody not named the Vikings 25% of the time last year. So a huge bread and butter of their offense was reduced to a small fraction of their offense against the Vikings. And it wasn't just this matchup against Brian Flores. It was last year as well. And that's what Flores will do. He'll go 5 down defensive linemen, 6 down defensive linemen, aggressive run blitzes, but he's very, very good at creating confusion, creating chaos, and he's good with his personnel. It's because of his personnel at dropping out of the aggressive run stances and getting guys back into coverage. So it's really hard to run play action when he can cover both bases like that. That's what's made Brian Flores special against the 49ers defense, especially early in the season. We're looking at week 3 right now. It was week 2 last week. It was week 7 when the Vikings beat the 49ers last year. But look at the offensive numbers around the league. At this time last year, the quarterback passing leader as far as yardage went through 2 weeks was Derek Carr. He had over 800 yards. This year, Brock Purdy leads the NFL in passing yardage with 550 yards through 2 weeks. Quarterbacks are averaging less than 200 pass yards a game. I think they're averaging 240 or 250 across the league in week 2 last season. Offensive numbers are way down. Passing efficiency is way down. I think it's directly connected to these teams just not taking preseason and training camp as seriously. And maybe we shouldn't say teams, maybe we should say players, but there's a lot of players who are put on ice over the course of training camp, who are holding out, holding in. The rules don't allow for two-a-days. There's much less practice. Obviously, preseason is not used as a tuning up period by most teams anymore. So what you have once you enter the actual regular season is you have September turn into that tune-up period for NFL teams. And because of that, defenses, especially exotic defenses, are ahead of where they'd typically be in their matchup against offenses. So the 49ers twice, they've seen Minnesota early in the season, and that was last year and then even earlier this year. And twice they've seemed a bit flummoxed by Brian Flores and company. I don't think that that's going to be nearly the issue that it was last week for the 49ers against the Rams this week. In fact, San Francisco can probably be the team that takes advantage of the fact that we're still in the preseason of this 2024 NFL campaign. The Rams down so many starters along their offensive line who are already graded this poorly, so poorly, way over here in their O-line play. They're going to have to face a hungry 49ers front, including ex-Ram Leonard Floyd and Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave, who I think started to heat up a little bit against the Minnesota Vikings. He had 2 pressures in that game. So it's one of those things where the Rams are so shorthanded right now, and there's so much early season chaos going on around the whole NFL with the offensive numbers down. And you've seen the defensive confusion, I think, really prevailing here early on. It should be a perfect storm for the 49ers to get in there and roll, to assert themselves, even despite the fact that they don't have their 2 big names on offense at those skill position weapons. They got more big names than that, but 2 of their big names. It's also, you look at this in matchup terms. Last time that the 49ers and the Rams played at full strength, of course, the 49ers had CMC and Debo, but the Rams also had Aaron Donald. He's retired, so there's no Aaron Donald on that side. It's increasingly looking like a rebuilding year for the Rams because, of large part, because of their injury situation, an involuntary rebuilding year, if we put it that way, because it's going to be really hard for them to find their footing, especially with their quarterback already staggering. He was going through some stuff in week 1. So you have to hope that Matt Stafford can stay healthy behind that offensive line, because that hasn't looked promising here through 2 weeks. And the 49ers are obviously going to be trying to get after him, rack up as many sacks as they can, many QB pressures as they can against the Rams on Sunday. Sean McVay said the other day in his press conference, the Rams are already running out of return to IR spots. He only have 8 of those. And he's saying, yeah, we're already kind of running out, and it's only week 2. And this was for the healthiest team in the league last year. The Rams had the fewest adjusted games lost in 2023. So this kind of stuff does tend to even out. Let's move it forward to a 49ers Q&A. It's an off day. Figured that I'd give you guys a little bit of a break from some of the content, but not a full break. We always have some shows, and maybe Margot and I will do a little bit of a live tonight to reset things. We have the grill going outside, so we might sit down outside, have a drink, talk to everybody, get ready for the meat of this season. 49ers have quite the schedule this year. We talked about that over the offseason, but after this, they're playing the Patriots. Then they have the Cardinals, who beat the Rams 41-10 last week. And then it gets crazy. The Seahawks, the Chiefs, the Cowboys. I think it's the bye week after that. Tampa Bay, who looks really strong coming out of the bye week. I mean, it is going to be, buckle up for the next couple months. I think after this cluster of games coming up, there's a 6-game stretch that the 49ers are going to face that might be the toughest 6-game stretch that any team faces in the league. So the 49ers want to make sure they're healthy as can be before then. They want to keep the structure at the very base of their team, those trenches, as healthy as possible. And then you could add Deebo Samuel. Then theoretically you can add Christian McCaffrey whenever he's ready to go. The goal for San Francisco is obviously to make the playoffs, get into the tournament, figure things out from there. But you want to stack as many wins as possible to increase the chances of the 1 seed or an easier path through the postseason. That's always been the goal through the year. Last year, they started 5-3 before they finished 12-5. This year, they're 1-1. It was a 5-0 start before they went 5-3 last year. So it's going to be mighty interesting to see how this all pans out for San Francisco. Still, even without Deebo and Christian McCaffrey, a very talented roster heading to SoFi Stadium in LA. All right, I've got some of the questions open. Let's go. The chat is talking about the possibility of Guerrero getting some touches. Well, he got a touch last week, and I think Ted Nguyen posted the film. There was stuffed for no gain. He needed to be more patient breaking outside He needed to slip into the hole that Trent Williams eventually created. The outside zone is about patience. It's about instincts. It's about patience. Isaac Guerrero is an elite athlete. There's no question about it. The metrics compared favorably to Saquon Barkley's, but that is only part of the battle in the NFL. You have to be able to feel where the hole is going to be. So especially in outside zone, when you're kind of probing, it stretches out like an accordion. You're rushing to the sideline and boom, hole opens up. And that's when you cut up field. You put that foot in the turf, one cut back. You make that cut up field. Isaac Guerrero only started one game in college despite his fantastic metrics. So the 49ers took a bet on him. They said, okay, we love the measurables. They're as good as Saquon Barkley's, but we know that this guy hadn't been a featured back in the past. We know that this guy is going to have to learn the ropes at the NFL level. And we hope that instinct is something that he acquires over time. I don't think it's something to expect that Isaac Guerrero is going to acquire overnight. And I think his first carry of his NFL career against the Minnesota Vikings did verify that. Is this a must win for the Rams? I don't believe in must wins unless you're going to be eliminated from playoff contention. I'm just a literal kind of guy. I think it's a very important game for the Rams. I think that, once you slide to 0-3, 0-4, it becomes apparent who you are that season, because even if guys return, then you're going to be too far behind the 8-ball. So the Rams should be desperate here, but I think they're also going to be overmatched from a personnel standpoint. And the 49ers have to take advantage of that. Thoughts on Yadam, Bosa, and Hargrave's early season performances? All right, so I thought Bosa was pretty good rushing the passer. He had those 2 sacks. I think he actually failed to set a couple of in the game against the Vikings, and I think the 49ers defense, that's something they need to make sure they revisit, because you just can't get sucked inside. The end has to set the edge. Charvarius Ward failed to set an edge too. That's a bread and butter kind of play that the 49ers have to make. That you can't just give up outside runs without any resistance. You then asked about Isaac Yadam. Yadam, I think, is getting a lot of heat right now, but to me, the secondary problems are more of cohesive alignment than one specific cornerback. Yadam is getting singled out because the throw to Jalen Nailor on the last 3rd and long from Sam Darnold, Yadam was sprinting behind Jalen Nailor and he didn't look back for the football. But remember that Sam Darnold threw that ball before even his receiver, Jalen Nailor, turned around. So you got to tip your cap on that play. It was an excellent throw, a gutsy throw. It beat the 49ers coverage. That's not to say the 49ers coverage was good. I think that there were some horrendous plays and they gave up way too many 3rd and longs, but I would give it a couple more weeks to see Nick Sorensen make the adjustments he needs to make. And then we'll see Yadam potentially work within that structure. Remember, Yadam had what I thought was the game sealing pass breakup in week 1 against the New York Jets, against Garrett Wilson. So he's done some good things already. Javon Hargrave had 1 pressure against the Jets. Then he had 2 pressures against the Minnesota Vikings. So it's been a slowish start. He's a guy that's going to typically end with about 60 to 70 pressures on the season. Obviously not quite on pace for that this year. Probably on pace in the 40 range at this point. But one game with 5 or 6 pressures obviously changes that whole pace, and we just have to be patient in that regard. Joe asks, David, seemed like Brock changed the play in a formation a few times against the Vikings. This is a shift from running whatever play is called to give Brock more control, or just calling 2 plays versus Vikings blitzes. You always have audible control as a quarterback. We've seen Purdy change the play before. The 49ers give multiple options going to the line of scrimmage. So I think it's a yes to both of your questions. It's not a shift from before. Purdy has that control, but he can shift from whatever play is called. I don't know if they called 2 heading to the line or 3, but they definitely have multiple options. And we did see Purdy making some of those changes at the line of scrimmage. Have the 49ers ditched the jet sweep this season? I don't think so. I think we're only 2 games in. We saw kind of a reverse that the 49ers ran that didn't work, the trick play against the New York Jets week 1. I know that wasn't a straight jet sweep, but it was lateral motion. They didn't run it against Minnesota. They obviously felt that wouldn't be a good play to run against that defense. I think somebody that could run some jet sweeps to the 49ers this year is the rookie, Jacob Cowing. Just imagine, what the 49ers were planning for their offense at the start of this season. It involved Christian McCaffrey. It involved Deebo Samuel. They're not going to have either of those 2 guys. It involved Ricky Pearsall. That's why they spent the first-round draft pick on him. It involved Brandon Ayuk firing at more cylinders than he has so far this year. And it involved Jacob Cowing, who they spent the 4th-round draft pick on. So there are a lot of players that the 49ers need either back on the field or back at greater efficiency than we've seen so far. This is not true. This comment says it seems that Brock Purdy is not checking down and holding the ball longer in the pocket. His interception was a check down. He was trying to force one in there to Kyle Juszczyk, and it got knocked up away and into the hands of a safety on the play, Josh Metellus. So I don't know what to tell you. I think that Purdy should be looking for opportunities downfield. I think that there can be multiple things happening at once as factors behind the sacks that we saw in this last game. We saw the pressure numbers. Those were very high. So I don't think the 49ers pass protected well in that football game. But there could have also been a lot of coverage confusion on the back end. And you just have to tip your hat to Minnesota in that case. Was that Brock Purdy's best career game? Of course not. Nobody's saying that it was. But I think it was also a damn good performance given the conditions, given the fact that Brian Flores has that amorphous defense with that skill position talent that can match the 49ers skill position talent. He's got the defense that's given them fits 2 years in a row, given the fact that that defense created a lot of tight windows. And part of the reason for those tight windows was that the 49ers receivers weren't generating the separation that they typically can generate. And I think a lot of that is the no training camp for Brandon Ayuk. I think he's got to play his way into shape. Well, the time is now for Brandon Ayuk to show up big time because Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey are both going to miss this game against the Rams. Who's going to replace Deebo? Nobody replaces Deebo. He's a unique player in NFL history. You try to pick up some slack for Deebo Samuel, but he is a unique talent that the 49ers just will operate differently without. They went 0-3 when Deebo Samuel wasn't on the field last year. Doesn't mean they're going to go 0-4 when you include this game. But it does, I think, indicate that he's an important player. Tough-minded player, brings an attitude, brings versatility. There's nobody else on this roster that plays like Deebo Samuel. But what you can do is the offense can, if more of the slack can run through Brandon Ayuk. He can pick up some of that slack. Chris Conley can pick up some of the slack. Maybe you see Jacob Cowing get a few more runs in this football game because he's the kind of guy that can run and end around in a different style than Deebo. He's more of a burner, straight speed style. But you have to adapt the game plan to the talent that you have available. So you can't just force somebody into the Deebo Samuel role and say, hey, you're 180 pounds. Why don't you play like the 220-pound Deebo Samuel? It just doesn't work that way. What are my thoughts on the pass protection, and do I see it getting better? Yeah, I think I look at all NFL teams right now in terms of their pass protection, and I think that this is the worst it's going to be in the league because offense is behind defense early on, especially with the general lack of training camp that we've seen. Remember, if you're talking about the 49ers pass protection, this is where they're at. They're middle of the pack on this XY chart. You know who's not middle of the pack? The Rams. way over here. They're dealing with way bigger problems. As long as the 49ers stay healthy, and that's something that the Rams have been unable to do up front, I think you'll see greater cohesion over the course of the year, and they'll move from middle of the pack to a little bit above middle of the pack because Dominic Pooney's got a lot of potential at right guard. Trent Williams is going to be great. You just know it at left tackle. Hasn't been his best through 2 weeks, but he did also miss training camp. I think Aaron Banks is in a contract year, so he's got every reason to put the very best film on tape. And they've been still very impressed with Dominic Pooney at right guard. I will maintain that center seems like the biggest weakness for the 49ers. That's Jake Brendell's spot. Played college ball, by the way, at UCLA. So he's going to be back in Southern California when the 49ers face the very beaten up Rams with all these injuries. So that's your first preview. We're going to delve into things very deeply this week. Thanks for watching.